as regards outgoings, first of all, because this could have an effect on Lukaku, Liam, June the 30th is a hugely important date for Chelsea. Why?
Yeah, it's kind of a transfer deadline that exists at Stamford Bridge, but nowhere else this summer. For people who don't know, the Premier League transfer window will open in the second week of June. It's usually around June 9th, June 10th. And that's for domestic transfers to be registered. So Chelsea have this window in which they can potentially sell players to other English clubs, most likely Premier League clubs, and still register those sales on this year's accounts, which cut off at June 30th. So that's why we're talking about June 30th as a deadline. As we all know, they've spent quite a lot over the last two transfer windows, easily north of £500 million in terms of initial transfer fee commitments, not factoring in add-ons. As of now, they've raised about 59 million in sales to go in this year's accounts, which it isn't quite as imbalanced as it seems on the surface because of the amortization. It does. But because those incoming transfers are amortized, the margins are a bit finer than they look. But the point is that Chelsea traditionally have relied on making significant profits on player trading in their accounts to either tip them into the black or mitigate losses in the Abramovich era. They're not set to make a significant profit on player trading, to put it mildly, this year, unless they can maybe make a couple of significant sales before June 30th. And that sets up a very interesting dynamic because Chelsea could be very motivated sellers, but other clubs will know that and have no incentive to help Chelsea get the best deals quickly.
What are you laughing at, Adam, already?
I'm laughing at the Todd Bowley spin on motivated seller, which also means desperate seller. I would imagine. You also know it's going to be a good pod when it's got amortization inside the opening 3 minutes.
In the past, they were good at moving players on, you would say, Liam, and actually the academy was a big part of the business plan.
Massively so. I think a lot of Chelsea fans were frustrated with the way that the academy seemed to be viewed by the old ownership as purely a money-making machine to fund signings. But there's no denying that it has been crucial to Chelsea's business model. In the piece I wrote on the June 30th deadline, I said that over the 4 years of accounts up to 21-22, which is the most recent published accounts that Chelsea have released, they've reported overall losses of £343 million, and that's despite making a £354 million profit on player trading over that time. Now, of course, that factors in COVID, loss of revenue, and all these exceptional things that wouldn't necessarily apply in a normal 4-year period, but it does give some indication as to how important player sales, and particularly academy players, because going back to amortization, Adam, they are classed as fully amortized from day one. There's no transfer fee, so when you sell them, whatever you sell them for is pure profit on the books. So Tammy Abraham, Fikayo Tomori, Mark Guehi last year played a really significant role in giving Chelsea a significant profit on player trading, despite signing Romelu Lukaku in the 21-22 tax year.
I think it will depend how quickly they get some of these deals in place. If none of these deals happen and all of a sudden you're on June the 27th, then I think other clubs will look at it and just start taking the mickey. If Chelsea are ahead of the game and forward planning and already have a few deals in place, which may well be the case, because if you are a Crystal Palace that want Conor Gallagher, or an Everton that want Broja, or West Ham that want someone else in that kind of category, then it's kind of mutually beneficial because you value that player highly. It's a young homegrown player from the registration point of view, so it might work out okay for Chelsea from that perspective. I think the problem with some of it is that some of these players, Levi Colwill, I think Chelsea fans probably looking at that and thinking, what, do we want Koulibaly and Badiashile, and do we want another few centre backs, or do we want to be giving some of these guys a chance? And that's unfair on Badiashile, who looks a really good player. But what I'm saying is, even when these Chelsea owners came in, everything they were saying was, we want the academy to be more than just a way of making money. We want to bring these players into the club. Yes, we want to develop them, sometimes sell them on, but we also want them to be part of the identity of the club. And it's amazing how quickly that has proved expendable as an identity for Chelsea over the years, regardless of ownership. And it was only really that period, wasn't it, when Frank Lampard couldn't sign anyone, where Chelsea really committed to that.
That's the key, isn't it, Liam? That with a Colwell or a Gallagher or a Broja, you probably could see a market there, because, as I mentioned, several clubs, whether it be West Ham or Newcastle or Palace or Villa or whatever it may be, there'd be slightly more of a battle than maybe there would be for a Hakim Ziyech.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there was a market for all three of those players you mentioned last summer, and Chelsea refused to sell them. Levi Colwill, there was significant interest in buying him, not least from Brighton, who didn't want to loan him. They wanted to buy him permanently, and Chelsea instead signed him to a new deal, made it clear that they considered him a big part of the project, and then went out and signed Benoit Badiashile 6 months later, who is pretty much the exact same profile of centre-back. Armando Broja is probably in a slightly different bracket now because of his ACL injury. I think he probably needs to come back and show that he's at the same level he was at before. But if he does that, I'm sure there'll be a market for him. I think a significant part of this equation is that a lot of these guys are not on big Chelsea first team money, which is often a barrier to a sale. And also Cobham is really highly regarded within football as an elite finishing school. Even if players don't quite make it at Chelsea, I think there's a big belief within football that Cobham graduates are good enough to have very, very good careers at the top level. And
Liam, is there, I suppose, the one player who falls between these two categories, between first team elite player and still young developing, is probably Mason Mount. He's kind of in that catchment between the two of them. Is the expectation, because I find this extraordinary from the outside, how quickly his standing at Chelsea seems to have changed, how his situation at Chelsea, I thought he would be there forever. Is the expectation now that he will probably leave?
I think it's looking that way. I think it's looking that way purely because of the nature of the contract standoff. And we're at a point now where there has been enough time for the new owners and Mason Mount's camp to get together and come to an agreement. And the fact that there hasn't been one, and we are now approaching 1 year left, and we've already been told in no uncertain terms that Chelsea's new owners do not want to lose players in the way that they lost Andreas Christensen and Antonio Rudiger as free agents when they have significant value. It's a very fraught situation. And they know there will be interest in Mason Mount. But I think if he does end up leaving this summer, it's difficult not to view it as a failure of the club. And that's not squarely on the new owners, because I think, Marina Granovskaya had ample opportunity to try and get Mason Mount extended as well, particularly in the wake of the Champions League win 2 years ago. But that is probably the most complicated situation. And if he leaves, he would be the one, I think, that Chelsea fans would be most disappointed about, particularly the ones who go to the games and really have a strong connection with him. But he kind of symbolises now the tension that they have, because there's all this talk that Mount could potentially leave. Chelsea could try to sign Joao Felix permanently. And that kind of sums up what a messy situation this is, because Mount is someone who could be a pillar of Chelsea for a long time, along with Reece James, and a real culture setter at the club. And Felix is going to be very, very expensive to sign if Chelsea do want him. and he hasn't necessarily proven that he can be valuable at that level yet.